The heat in the illegal mining outpost known as Porto de Lama wasn't just a weather condition, it was a physical assault. It rose from the mud, mixed with diesel fuel. It radiated from the rusted tin roofs of the shacks, and it seemed to emanate from the bodies of the 200 men who lived, drank and fought in that scar carved out of the jungle. It was a place where the laws of the capital didn't reach. A sovereign state of greed and sweat located 3 days upriver from the nearest police station. Captain Marcus walked through the makeshift main street, his boots sinking slightly into the black sludge that served as pavement. He kept his head down, the brim of his cap pulled low, his eyes hidden behind dark ballistic sunglasses. He wasn't there to dispense justice today. He was on a logistics run. His generator needed parts, his medical kit needed antibiotics, and the isolation of his own shack, while peaceful, didn't produce gasoline. By his side, Max moved with a disciplined trot. The German shepherd didn't like this place. The air was thick with the smell of aggressive, drunk men, rotting garbage, and raw mercury used in the gold extraction process. Max's ears were pinned back, his body tense, pressing his shoulder against Marcus's leg every few steps, as if to remind his handler that they were in a target-rich environment. Marcus rested his hand briefly on the dog's head, a silent signal to hold fire. We get the fuel, we get out. Marcus reached the supply depot, a large shed open on 3 sides, and began negotiating with the merchant, a man with yellow eyes and a revolver tucked openly into his waistband. The transaction was slow. In the Amazon, time expands, and patience is a currency as valuable as gold dust. While the merchant counted the stack of bills Marcus had placed on the counter, money earned from selling engineered woodwork to river traders, a commotion erupted near the riverbank. It started as a low murmur, a ripple of laughter and jeers moving through the crowd of miners and boatmen, but it quickly swelled into a roar of anticipation. It was the sound of a mob scenting blood or entertainment. Marcus tried to ignore it. His rule was simple: don't get involved. He was a ghost. Ghosts don't intervene in the affairs of the living. He picked up his jerry cans of fuel, signaling Max to turn around. But as he turned, the crowd parted slightly, and he saw what was happening on the wooden platform, usually used to weigh pirarucu fish. The movement stopped Marcus in his tracks. His tactical mind assessed the situation before his moral compass even registered the horror. Target: a woman. Hostiles: 5 armed men surrounding her. Bystanders: 50, maybe 60, complicit and cheering. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with the strong, high cheekbones of the indigenous people of the Upper Rio Negro, and long, dark hair that hung heavy with sweat and river water. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing Marcus noticed. Most people in her situation, hands bound in front of them with rough hemp rope, standing on display before a crowd of hungry wolves, would be weeping or begging. She was doing neither. She stood with her spine straight, her chin lifted, staring over the heads of the mob at the tree line on the other side of the river. Her clothes were torn and muddy, evidence of a struggle, but her spirit seemed to be hovering somewhere above the platform, untouchable. A man climbed onto the platform next to her. He was huge, a mountain of fat and muscle, wearing gold chains that looked ridiculous against his sweat-stained shirt. This was Beto, a labor broker, a man who traded in debt. The man shouted to the crowd, his voice booming. He wasn't selling a slave. That word was illegal. He was selling a debt contract. He claimed the woman's father had died, owing him a fortune in supplies. And now, according to the brutal law of the river, the daughter had to work it off. Everyone knew what work meant. It meant cooking, cleaning, and whatever else the highest bidder wanted, until she was broken or dead. Marcus felt a familiar sensation in his right hand, the tremor. It started in his fingertips and ran up his forearm. It wasn't fear. It was the physical manifestation of a moral allergy. His body was rejecting the reality in front of him. He looked at Max. The dog was no longer pressing against his leg. Max was standing rigid, staring at the woman on the platform, a low vibration building in his chest. The dog knew innocence when he saw it. "Going once," the broker shouted. "Who wants a cook who knows the woods? Strong back, pretty face. A miner in the front row shouted a bid. 3 grams of gold. The crowd laughed. Another shouted 5. Marcus stood in the shadow of the supply shed. He calculated the distance. 40 yards. He had a pistol concealed under his shirt and a knife. He could drop the broker and the 2 guards before they cleared leather. But then he would have 50 armed miners between him and the boat. It would be a massacre, and the woman would likely die in the crossfire. Violence was not the tool for today. He looked at the woman again. At that moment, her eyes shifted. She stopped looking at the horizon and looked at the crowd. Her gaze swept past the laughing faces and landed, with uncanny precision, on Marcus. She didn't know who he was. She couldn't see his eyes behind the sunglasses, but she saw how he stood. She saw the military bearing, the lack of laughter, the dangerous dog at his side. She didn't plead. She didn't mouth, "Help me." She simply looked at him with a gaze of searing intensity that asked a single silent question. "Are you just another one of them?" Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. He remembered the faces of villagers in Kandahar he had left behind, because orders were orders. He remembered the guilt that tasted like ash in his mouth. He couldn't save the world. He knew that. But he was standing here, right now. And he had resources. The bidding had stalled at 10 grams of gold. The broker looked disappointed. He grabbed the woman's arm roughly, shaking her. "Look at her. Healthy. 10 grams is an insult." Marcus stepped out of the shadows. The mud sucked at his boots with a wet sound. He walked toward the platform, the crowd parting instinctively for the big man and the wolf dog. The silence spread outward from him like a wave. Marcus stopped at the base of the platform. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the broker. $1,500, Marcus said. His voice wasn't loud, but it projected with the flat authority of an officer giving a briefing. The crowd gasped. Dollars. Hard American currency. In the jungle, the dollar was king, worth far more than the volatile local currency or the unrefined gold dust that could be mixed with sand. The broker froze. He squinted at Marcus. "Cash?" the fat man asked, suspicion warring with greed. "Cash. Right now," Marcus replied. "But she leaves with me. No debt, no contract. She walks away free." The broker licked his lips. $1,500 was a fortune here. It was more than the woman would earn him in 5 years. "Sold to the gringo," the broker yelled, slamming his hand on the rail. The crowd murmured, disappointed that the show was over, but respectful of the money. Marcus climbed the steps. He pulled a waterproof envelope from his pocket. It contained his emergency fund, the money he kept for a fast exit if his cover was ever blown. He counted out the bills. He kept $3, handing over exactly 1,000 franken, 97 mas. It wasn't the full 1,500, but the broker didn't care about the missing $3 when he saw the stack of hundreds. Marcus put the envelope away. He turned to the woman. He pulled a knife from his belt. The crowd tensed, expecting violence. The woman didn't flinch. She watched the blade approach her wrists. With a single controlled slice, Marcus cut the hemp rope binding her hands. The rope fell to the platform floor. He sheathed the knife. "Let's go," he said to her, in Portuguese. She rubbed her raw wrists. She looked at the money in the broker's hand, then at Marcus. There was no gratitude in her eyes. There was shock, yes, but mostly a deep, burning suspicion. She had just been bought. In her world, ownership had just changed hands. She didn't believe in freedom, because she hadn't seen any in a long time. She followed him off the platform, not walking beside him, but a few paces behind, head down, like a prisoner being transferred. The walk back to Marcus's boat was a gauntlet of stairs. The miners watched them pass with envy and malice. Marcus kept his hand near his waistband. Max kept his head on a swivel, growling at anyone who stepped too close. They reached the skiff. Marcus tossed the fuel cans in. He pointed to the front seat. "Get in," he told her. She hesitated. She looked at the river, then at the jungle. She could run, but where? The outpost was surrounded by hundreds of miles of wilderness. Without supplies, she would be dead in 2 days. She stepped into the boat, sitting stiffly. wrapping her arms around herself. Marcus pushed the boat off the mud. He started the engine, and they peeled away from the hell of Porto de Lama. As the wind hit his face, Marcus realized what he had done. He had come for gasoline. He was leaving with a human being. He had broken his one rule: isolation. He looked at the woman's back. He had saved her life, yes, but looking at the rigid tension in her shoulders, he knew the hardest part wasn't buying her freedom. It would be convincing her that she actually had it. The journey back to Marcus's sector took 3 hours. For the first 2, the only sound was the drone of the outboard motor and the slap of the hull against the chop. The Amazon's sunset burned itself out in a spectacular display of violet and blood orange, but neither the veteran nor the woman watched it. Marcus stood at the tiller, navigating by memory and the silhouette of the tree line. He kept his eyes scanning the banks, checking for pursuit boats from the mining camp, though he knew the broker wouldn't chase the money. The woman sat on the middle bench, her back straight, staring fixedly at the water. She hadn't spoken a word since he cut her bonds. She held herself with the defensive rigidity of someone expecting a blow. To her, Marcus was just a different kind of captor. Richer, cleaner, perhaps more dangerous because he was quiet. It was Max who broke the ceasefire. The German shepherd had been holding his post at the bow, wind in his fur. Halfway through the trip, the dog stood up, stretched, and walked back toward the stern. He stopped next to the woman. He didn't sniff her intrusively. He simply stood there, his massive head level with her shoulder. Marcus watched from the corner of his eye. He didn't call the dog off. He trusted Max's judgment of character more than any background check. Max let out a long exhale and leaned his heavy body against the woman's leg. It was a gesture of grounding, a transfer of warmth. The woman flinched at first, pulling her arm back, but when the dog didn't move, didn't growl, just offered his silent, solid presence, her posture softened. Tentatively, her hand moved. Her fingers, still marked by the rope burns, buried themselves in the thick fur behind Max's ears. Max closed his eyes. The woman looked at the dog, and for the first time, the mask of stony pride slipped, revealing a glimpse of exhaustion. She wasn't alone in the boat anymore. She had an ally. Night had fully fallen when Marcus cut the engine and let the skiff drift into the hidden inlet below his shack. The silence that rushed in was deafening. The stilt house loomed above them, a dark shape against the stars. To Marcus, it was a sanctuary. To her, it must have looked like a prison in the middle of nowhere. "We're here," Marcus said, his Portuguese heavily accented but clear. He jumped into the shallow water to pull the boat up. He didn't offer his hand to help her out. He knew she wouldn't take it. She climbed out on her own, ignoring the mud that coated her bare feet. They walked up the path. Marcus unlocked the reinforced door and lit the gas lantern inside. The golden light revealed the Spartan interior, the rough table, the hammock in the corner, the military gear neatly organized on shelves. It was a soldier's bivouac, not a home. Marcus pointed to a small side room he had partitioned off for storage, but had recently cleared out. It had a sturdy wooden door and a small window with a mosquito net. "That is your room," Marcus said. "There is a hammock and a clean blanket." She looked at the room, then at him. Her eyes were dark, calculating. "And what is the price?" she asked. Her voice was raspy, unused but sharp. "You paid a lot of money. What do I have to do?" Marcus took off his cap and ran a hand through his messy, graying hair. He looked tired. He walked over to his gear shelf. He picked up something. It wasn't a key. It was a hunting knife in a leather sheath. He walked over to her and held it out, handle first. She looked at the knife, confused. "Take it," Marcus said. She hesitated, then grabbed the handle. She held it like a weapon, stepping back. "The door to your room has a sliding bolt on the inside," Marcus said, keeping his voice flat and unemotional. "You can lock it. I will never enter without your permission. The knife is for your peace of mind. If anyone, including me, tries to come through that door, you use it." She stared at him, the knife heavy in her hand. This broke every rule of the world she knew. Men with power didn't arm their purchases. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you buy me?" Marcus looked away, toward the darkness outside the window, where the jungle hummed. Because I have seen enough cages, he said quietly. You are not a debt to be paid. You are a free woman. The boat is yours to use if you can navigate. If not, stay until you are ready to go. But while you are here, you are safe. He turned his back on her and started to unbuckle his tactical vest, signaling the conversation was over. My name is Marcus, he said over his shoulder. She stood there for a long time, clutching the knife. She looked at Max, who was watching her from his rug. I am Yara, she whispered. She went into the small room and closed the door. Marcus heard the distinct clack of the wooden bolt sliding home. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He sat down at his table and poured a glass of water. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the glass. He had just invited a stranger with a knife into his sleeping quarters. It was a tactical nightmare. But as he listened to the silence of the house, a silence that now held the rhythm of another person's breathing, he knew it was the only move he could have made. Trust is not built in a day. It is built in the quiet moments between survival tasks. The first week in the shack passed in a strange, tense rhythm. They were like two apex predators sharing a cage, circling each other, measuring boundaries, waiting for a snap that never came. Yara kept her word. She stayed in her room with the door bolted at night, but during the day, she emerged. She didn't act like a guest, nor did she act like a servant. She acted like someone claiming territory. She took over the kitchen, a corner with a propane stove and a few cast iron pans, and reorganized it with efficient, silent movements. She swept the floor, not because Marcus ordered her to, but because the dust offended her. Marcus continued his patrol and maintenance routine. He woke at 0400, did his physical training, push-ups, pull-ups on a tree branch, and then checked the perimeter sensors. He tried to stay out of her way, giving her the space he promised, but the shack was small, and the rain forced them together. It was on the 5th day that the dynamic shifted. The morning was humid, the air thick enough to drink. Marcus was sitting at the main table, trying to repair a torn strap on his tactical vest. It was a simple task: thread a needle, stitch the nylon webbing. But his body wasn't cooperating. The tremor in his right hand was violent today. The needle danced in his fingers, refusing to enter the fabric. Marcus clenched his jaw, frustration radiating off him like heat. He dropped the needle, rubbed his face hard, and took a deep, shaky breath. He looked at his hand, as if it were a traitorous subordinate he wanted to court-martial. He didn't know he was being watched. Yara was standing by the back door, holding a basket of wet laundry. She saw the tremor. She saw the scars on his knuckles. She saw the exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders. For the first time, she didn't see the gringo or the soldier. She saw a man who was fighting a war inside his own skin. She put the basket down. She walked over to the table. Max, sleeping by Marcus's feet, thumped his tail but didn't rise. Yara didn't ask for permission. She reached out and took the needle and the vest from Marcus's hands. Her fingers were cool and steady. Marcus flinched, surprised by her proximity, but he didn't pull away. He watched as she threaded the needle in one smooth motion. She sat down on the bench opposite him and began to stitch. Her hands moved with a blur of speed and precision, the kind of muscle memory born from years of making nets and mending clothes by riverlight. You drink too much of that black water, she said, nodding at his strong coffee. It was the first time she had spoken to him in 2 days. It makes the blood vibrate. Marcus looked at his coffee, then at her. It keeps me awake, he defended, his voice gruff. It keeps you shaking, she corrected, without looking up from the sewing. The jungle has better medicine. She finished the repair in 5 minutes, bit the thread with her teeth, and slid the vest back to him. The stitching was stronger than the factory original. Marcus ran his thumb over the work. He looked at her, really looked at her. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a calm, assessing intelligence. Thank you, he said. That afternoon, Yara disappeared. Marcus felt a spike of panic. Had she run? Had she taken the boat? He checked the dock. The boat was there. He checked the perimeter. Max was calm. She returned an hour later, her skirt wet to the knees, carrying a bundle of green leaves and dark roots she had harvested from the forest edge. She took over the kitchen. She didn't ask what he wanted to eat. She simply cooked. The smell that filled the shack wasn't the usual scent of Marcus's MREs or plain rice. It was rich, earthy, and spicy. She had caught fish using a hand line off the dock and seasoned it with the wild herbs. She placed a metal plate in front of him. Beside it, instead of coffee, she placed a cup of steaming tea made from the roots she had gathered. "Drink," she ordered. "It quiets the nerves." Marcus tasted the tea. It was bitter, woody, but it left a warm sensation in his chest. He ate the fish. It was the best meal he had eaten in years. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the heavy, awkward silence of the first days. It was a companionable quiet. Max lay between them, chewing on a fish head Yara had given him, making happy crunching noises. After dinner, Marcus sat on the porch to clean his weapon. He noticed his hand. He held it out in the lantern light. The tremor was almost gone. He looked back into the house. Yara was humming a low, indigenous melody while she cleaned the plates. The shack didn't feel like a bunker anymore. It felt like a home. Marcus realized then that he hadn't just bought her freedom. By bringing her here, he had inadvertently saved himself from the rot of isolation. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She was a survivor, just like him. And for the first time since he left the teams, Marcus thought that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to hold the line entirely alone. The Amazon does not know moderation. When it rains, it tries to drown the world. When the sun shines, it tries to burn it. On this particular night, the sky had decided to wage a war of water against the earth. The storm that descended upon Marcus's sector was not a passing squall. It was a meteorological siege. Thunder didn't roll. It cracked like artillery fire directly overhead, shaking the very foundations of the stilt house. The wind howled through the gaps in the wooden siding, carrying with it a fine mist of water that dampened everything inside, making the air heavy, cold, and electric. Around 2100 hours, the small gasoline generator that powered the few electric lights in the shack sputtered, coughed twice, and died. The silence of the machinery was immediately swallowed by the roar of the deluge outside. Marcus didn't move to fix it. Going out into that downpour to wrestle with a flooded carburetor wasn't worth the effort. Instead, he struck a match. The flame flared, smelling of sulfur, and he lit the wick of an old kerosene lantern. He then fed a few dry logs into the cast-iron wood stove in the corner of the room. The fire caught quickly, casting long, dancing shadows against the rough timber walls, transforming the shack into a cave of flickering orange light and deep, pooling darkness. Marcus sat on the floor near the stove, his back resting against the wall, one leg extended, the other bent at the knee. He held a tin cup of the bitter root tea Yara had brewed earlier. The heat from the metal cup seeped into his palms, combating the chill that the storm had brought. Max, the sable German shepherd, lay beside him, his massive head resting on his paws, his eyes tracking the shadows, but his body relaxed. The dog didn't mind the storm. He felt safe in the den. Yara sat opposite them, cross-legged on a woven mat. She was working on a piece of fabric, stitching it by the dim light of the lantern, but her hands moved slower tonight. The storm seemed to affect her, too. Every time a thunderclap shattered the air, Marcus saw a microscopic flinch in her shoulders, a tightening of the muscles around her eyes. It wasn't the fear of a child. It was the reflex of someone who associated loud noises with bad things. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackling of the wood and the relentless drumming of the rain. It was a heavy silence, but not an empty one. It was filled with the weight of the things they hadn't said to each other in the 2 weeks since he had bought her freedom on that rotting platform. A particularly violent peal of thunder ripped through the sky, sounding dangerously like a 155mm howitzer shell impacting close by. Marcus reacted instinctively. His body jerked, his hand going to the phantom weapon on his chest, his breath hitching in a sharp intake. It was the PTSD response, the startle reflex that no amount of therapy or time in the jungle had managed to fully erase. He exhaled slowly, unclenching his fist, forcing his heart rate to decelerate. He took a sip of tea to hide the reaction, but when he looked up, He saw Yara watching him. She wasn't looking at his face. She was looking at his hand, which was trembling again, despite her medicine. "The thunder sounds like them, doesn't it?" she asked. Her voice was low, barely rising above the sound of the rain, but it carried a weight of understanding that caught Marcus off guard. Marcus looked at her. The firelight softened the sharp angles of her face, but it couldn't hide the depth of the darkness in her eyes. "Like who?" Marcus asked, his voice gravelly. "The bombs," she said simply. "The things that break the world." Marcus looked down into his cup. The dark liquid reflected the dancing flames. He hadn't spoken about his past to anyone in years. Not to the VA doctors, not to his ex-wife, not even to himself. But here, in the dark, with the storm isolating them from the rest of humanity, the walls of his fortress began to crack. "It wasn't bombs," Marcus said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "It was the road, the sand. We were driving, a routine patrol. We had done it 100 times. The sun was so bright it turned the sky white." He paused, the memory assaulting him. The heat, the smell of diesel and dust, the banter of his team over the comms. "I was in the lead vehicle," he continued, his eyes unfocused, looking through the walls of the shack to a desert halfway across the world. "I saw a pile of trash on the side of the road. Just trash, plastic bags, rocks. I called it out. But the driver of the second Humvee, he didn't hear me, or he was distracted, or it was just his time. He drove over it." Max lifted his head and whined, sensing the spike in Marcus's distress. He nudged Marcus's elbow. Marcus stroked the dog's ear mechanically. It was an IED, improvised explosive device, fertilizer and fuel buried in a plastic jug. The blast. Marcus swallowed hard. The blast flipped a 3-ton armored truck like a toy. The sound, it's not like in the movies. It's not a boom. It's a physical punch. It sucks the air out of your lungs. And then the silence. The dust covers everything. And for a few seconds there is no sound. Just the ringing in your ears. Yara stopped sewing. She placed the fabric on her lap and looked at him, her expression unreadable but intense. "My team," Marcus whispered. 3 men, my brothers. They were gone. Just like that. I was 20 feet away and I couldn't do anything. I got this. He touched the thick, jagged scar that ran from his shoulder up his neck. Shrapnel. A piece of the truck door. It missed my jugular by 2 millimeters. The doctors stitched me up. They fixed the muscle. But the shaking never stopped. My hands work when I have a weapon, when I'm in danger. But when I'm safe, when I'm trying to be a normal human, they shake. Because they know I shouldn't be here. I should be with them, in the sand. The confession hung in the humid air. Marcus felt exposed, naked in a way he hadn't been since he stripped off his uniform. He waited for her to offer pity, or to look away in discomfort. Instead, Yara moved. She shifted on the mat, moving closer to the stove, closer to him. She extended her hand and pulled up the sleeve of her loose cotton blouse. On her forearm, running from the wrist to the elbow, was a series of small circular scars. Burns. Cigarette burns. Old. Healed. But visible as pale craters against her copper skin. "The miners came at night," Yara said. Her voice didn't tremble. It was flat, factual, like reading a report. "My village was small. We lived near the river headwaters, far from the city. We didn't have gold, but we had land. They wanted the land for an airstrip. They didn't ask. They burned." Marcus looked at the scars on her arm. The rage he had felt on the platform returned, cold and sharp, but he pushed it down to listen. "They set fire to the thatched roofs while we slept," she continued. "The fire makes a sound like a roar, like a beast eating the wood. I ran. My father, he stayed behind to fight them with a machete. He bought us time. My mother and my sisters ran into the forest. I fell. One of them grabbed me by the hair. She touched her hair, a subconscious gesture. He was a big man. He smelled of gasoline. He dragged me to their boat. I fought. I bit him. That was when he gave me the first mark." She traced one of the burns. "To teach me a lesson," he said. "He kept me for 3 years. I cooked for them. I cleaned their clothes. I hauled their water. And every time I tried to run, every time I refused an order, I got another lesson. She looked at Marcus. Her eyes were dry. She had cried all her tears years ago. One day, he got drunk and fell into the river. He drowned. I didn't help him. I watched him sink. His debts were passed to another man, and then another. I became currency, a thing to be traded, until the day you stood on that platform. Marcus looked at her with a new, profound respect. He had thought he was the only one carrying a heavy load. He had thought his war was the only war. But this woman, this cook he had bought to save, had survived a war that lasted longer and was more intimate than anything he had faced in the desert. She hadn't had a team, or body armor, or air support. She had survived alone, surrounded by monsters, armed only with her will. "You are a soldier," Marcus said softly, "just like me." Yara shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "You fought because you were sent. I fought because I had no choice. But we both carry the marks. The jungle, it doesn't care about our scars. It only cares that we are still standing." She reached out and took the tin cup from his hand. Her fingers brushed his, her skin cool, his skin fever-hot. She took a sip of the tea, sharing it with him, a gesture of intimacy that transcended romance. It was the breaking of bread between survivors. "The shaking will stop," she said, handing the cup back. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the trees take the pain away if you let them. My father used to say that the forest is big enough to bury any sorrow." Marcus took the cup. He looked at his hand. It was still trembling, but less so. He looked at Max. The dog had moved. He was now lying with his head on Yara's knee and his back against Marcus's leg, forming a physical bridge between the two humans. The dog knew. The pack was forming. "Why didn't you run?" Marcus asked. "When I gave you the knife, when I showed you the boat, you could have gone to the city. You could have disappeared." Yara looked into the fire. The flames reflected in her dark pupils. "The city is just another jungle, but with concrete walls and men who don't look you in the eye," she said. "And you looked at me, on the platform. You didn't look at my body. You looked at my anger. You saw me. And when you brought me here, you gave me a knife. You gave me a lock. You gave me power. A man who gives power to a woman he could have enslaved. That is a man worth watching. I stayed because for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like I was with a wolf." She nodded at Max. "And wolves protect their own." The storm outside raged on, the wind battering the walls, trying to tear the roof off. But inside the small circle of lantern light, the atmosphere had changed. The tension of the first week had evaporated, replaced by a heavy, solemn bond. They were two broken pieces of pottery that didn't quite fit together, but could support each other against the crushing weight of the world. Marcus finished the tea. He placed the cup on the floor. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. It was the most honest thing he had said in a decade. Yara picked up her sewing again. "Get some sleep, Marcus," she said, using his name with a familiarity that felt earned. "The storm will pass by morning, and there is work to do. The roof is leaking in the back." Marcus leaned his head back against the wall. He closed his eyes. The images of the burning Humvee were still there, lurking in the dark corners of his mind. But they were quieter now, pushed back by the sound of Yara's needle-piercing fabric and the steady, rhythmic breathing of the dog. For the first time in a long time, the ex-Navy SEAL didn't feel like a sentry on a solitary watch. He felt like he was part of a garrison, and as sleep finally overtook him, dragged down by the exhaustion of the day and the catharsis of the night, his right hand lay on his chest, still and steady as a stone. The morning sun didn't just rise, it erupted over the canopy, steaming the moisture left by the storm off the jungle floor. The world was awash in a blinding, humid haze. Inside the shack, the atmosphere had shifted again. The confessional intimacy of the night before had crystallized into a silent, steely resolve. Yara woke up different. There was a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there when she was cooking or sewing. She packed a small bag, a bottle of water, a trowel she used for the garden, and a piece of cloth. She stood on the porch, looking upriver, toward the dense, tangled tributaries that fed into the main channel. "I have to go back," she said to Marcus, who was oiling his boots on the steps. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't ask for a ride. She was stating a fact of physics. Gravity was pulling her to a specific set of coordinates, and she would go, with or without him. Marcus didn't try to stop her. He didn't ask why or where. He knew that look. It was the extraction look, the face of a soldier going back into the hot zone to retrieve a fallen comrade. He simply stood up, went inside, and geared up. He put on his tactical vest, checked the load in his 12 gauge, and clipped a first aid kit to his belt. "I'm driving," he said. They took the skiff. Max jumped in first, taking his station at the prow, his nose tasting the wind. The journey wasn't along the wide commercial river where Marcus had brought her. Yara guided him into the narrow veins of the forest, igarapes so choked with vegetation that the sunlight barely touched the water. The water here was black, acidic, and still as a mirror. For 3 hours they navigated a labyrinth. Marcus had to kill the engine multiple times and use a paddle or the machete to clear hanging vines and fallen logs. It was slow, grueling work. The heat was oppressive, trapped by the green tunnel around them. Yara sat in the front, her eyes scanning the banks not for threats, but for memories. She pointed to a twisted samauma tree. "Left here," she whispered. She pointed to a rock formation that looked like a sleeping turtle. "Right." She was navigating by the landmarks of her childhood, a map drawn in trauma and nostalgia. Finally, the stream became too shallow for the boat. The propeller churned mud. "We walk from here," Marcus said, securing the boat to a root. They stepped into the virgin jungle. This wasn't the cleared perimeter around Marcus's shack. This was the deep bush. The ground was soft, covered in layers of decaying leaves that hid holes and snakes. Marcus took point, machete in hand, clearing a path, but he let Yara set the direction. Max flanked them, moving silently through the undergrowth, his hackles slightly raised. The dogs sensed they were entering a place that held no living scent, only the musk of old things. After an hour of hiking, the vegetation changed. The trees were younger here, thinner. The undergrowth was chaotic, fighting for space. Secondary growth, Marcus noted internally. Something cleared this area 10 years ago. They stepped into a clearing that the jungle was fighting hard to reclaim. It was a graveyard of ghosts. There were no bodies, but the scars were unmistakable. Charred stumps of wooden posts stuck out of the ground like black teeth. The outline of fire pits. A rusted metal pot, half buried in the dirt. A child's sandal, made of rubber, dissolved by time and fungus. It was the ruins of Yara's village. Marcus stopped at the perimeter. He assumed a guard stance, weapon at the low ready, scanning the tree line. This place was a tactical nightmare. Overgrown, poor visibility, but he knew he wasn't the focus here. "Clear," he said softly. Yara walked into the center of the clearing. She walked slowly, stepping over the vines as if entering a cathedral. She didn't cry. Her face was a mask of concentration. She was reconstructing the village in her mind, overlaying the memory of what was upon the ruin of what is. She stopped at a nondescript patch of earth, marked only by the blackened remains of a hearthstone. "This was the kitchen," she whispered. "My mother was making manioc flour when they came." She knelt. She took the garden trowel from her bag. She didn't dig randomly. She measured the distance from the stone with her hand, triangulating a specific spot. She began to dig. The earth was hard, compacted by rain and time. She dug with a fierce, rhythmic intensity, ignoring the sweat dripping off her nose, ignoring the mosquitoes biting her arms. Marcus watched her, his heart heavy. He knew what it was like to search the ashes. He had done it in burned-out convoys, looking for dog tags. He kept his eyes on the jungle, ensuring no jaguar or illegal logger would disturb her, but his peripheral vision stayed on her. Max walked over to her. The dog sat down next to the hole she was digging. He didn't try to help. He just sat guard, facing outward, protecting her back. After 20 minutes, her trowel hit something hard, not a rock, a hollow sound. Yara stopped. She used her hands to clear the dirt. She pulled out a metal box. It was an old biscuit tin, rusted shut, the paint flaking off. She held it like it was the Holy Grail. She sat back on her heels, breathing hard. Her hands trembled as she pried the lid open. The rust gave way with a screech. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had surprisingly held up against the humidity, were the treasures of a lost life. Not gold, not money. There was a necklace made of river shells, a faded photograph of a family standing in front of a maloca, a small bag of seeds, and a man's comb, carved from bone. Yara picked up the comb. She ran her thumb over the teeth. "My father's," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "He hid this box before he went out to fight them. He told me, if we run, we come back for the seeds. If we die, the seeds stay for the earth." She clutched the comb to her chest and bowed her head. The dam broke. The weeping wasn't loud. It was a low, keening sound, the sound of a grief that had been held in check for 3 years of slavery and survival. She rocked back and forth, mourning not just her father, but the girl she used to be, the life that was stolen by fire and greed. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to look away, to give her privacy, but he couldn't. He needed to witness this. This was the funeral she never got to hold. This was the closing of the circle. He took a step closer, not to touch her, but to offer his shadow as shade against the brutal sun. Max whined and licked the tears from her cheek. She didn't push the dog away. She buried her face in his neck, sobbing into the fur of the beast, letting the animal absorb the pain that no human could fix. She cried until there were no tears left. Then, she took a deep breath and wiped her face with her dirty hands. She took the necklace and put it around her neck. She put the comb in her pocket. Then, she took the bag of seeds. She looked at Marcus. "These are for the future," she said. "I can't plant them here. This place is dead. The spirits have moved on." She stood up. She looked at the ruins one last time. She didn't look back with longing. She looked with acceptance. The ghosts were laid to rest. "Let's go home, Marcus," she said. The walk back to the boat was different. The forest didn't feel as oppressive. Yara moved with a lighter step, her head high. She had gone into the underworld and retrieved her soul. Marcus followed her, watching the woman who walked ahead of him. She wasn't the victim he had bought on a platform. She was a queen returning from exile. They reached the boat as the afternoon rain began to fall, a gentle shower that washed the graveyard dust from their clothes. Marcus pushed the boat into the water. "You okay?" he asked, offering her a hand to step in. For the first time, she took his hand. Her grip was strong, calloused, alive. "I am now," she said. As they motored back down the narrow channel, leaving the ruins behind, Marcus realized that he had been wrong about his mission. He thought he was the sentinel of the jungle, the protector of the territory. But looking at Yara, clutching her father's comb, he realized that some things cannot be protected by guns or walls. Some things can only be preserved by memory and the courage to face the ashes. He had saved her body from the miners, but today she had saved herself. The return trip downriver felt like waking up from a long, feverish dream. The narrow, suffocating channels of the Igapo gradually widened, the black water merging with the brown, churning current of the main river. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and purples, a stark contrast to the harsh glare of the ruined village. When they docked at the shack, the world seemed quieter. The oppressive weight that had hung over Yara, and by extension, over the house, had lifted. She stepped onto the wooden planks of the pier with a firmness in her stride that Marcus hadn't seen before. She didn't rush to her room to hide. She stood by the water, looking out at the vast expanse of the Amazon, the wind playing with her dark hair. Marcus secured the boat and unloaded their gear. He watched her. This was the moment. The extraction was complete. The mission objectives were met. Target secured, trauma addressed, assets recovered. Now came the debrief, or the departure. A sound cut through the evening air. The deep, rhythmic thrum of a large diesel engine. A supply barge, a floating general store that traveled between Manaus and the Colombian border, was chugging upriver. It was slow, brightly lit, playing brega music from a loudspeaker. It was civilization, or as close as it got out here. It was a ticket out. Marcus walked up to Yara. He stood next to her, not looking at her, but looking at the approaching barge. "That boat stops at São Gabriel in 2 days," he said, his voice neutral. "From there, you can get a plane to the capital, or a bus to the coast." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a roll of cash, the rest of his emergency fund. He held it out to her. "It's enough to start over, rent an apartment, buy clothes, maybe find a school." Yara looked at the money. It was freedom. It was the city, with its lights and noise and anonymity. It was a place where no one knew her name or her scars. She looked at the barge passing by, its lights reflecting on the water. She watched the people on the deck laughing and drinking. Then she looked back at the shack. It was dark, crooked, isolated. But on the porch, Max was waiting, his tail thumping a slow rhythm on the wood. And next to her stood a man with a scar on his neck and shaking hands, who had walked into hell to find a tin box of memories for her. She looked at Marcus. "You think I want to leave?" she asked. "I think you deserve a choice," Marcus replied. "You didn't choose to come here. I brought you." Yara took the money from his hand. She held it for a second, weighing it. Then she shoved it back into his chest pocket. "I made my choice," she said. "The city is noise. The city is where men like Beto hide in suits. Here," she gestured to the jungle. "Here, the monsters have teeth you can see. And here, the earth is waiting." She pulled the small bag of seeds from her pocket, the ones her father had died to protect. "These seeds," she said, holding them up to the last light of the day. "They are cupuaçu and acai from the old stock. They need soil that knows them. They won't grow in concrete." She turned and walked toward the shack, past Marcus, past the boat, toward the patch of cleared earth near the garden. "I'm staying," she called back over her shoulder. "Not because you paid for me, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I have work to do, and someone needs to make sure you eat something other than MREs." Marcus stood on the dock for a long moment. A smile, rare and genuine, cracked his weathered face. He watched the barge disappear around the bend, taking the option of normal life with it. He didn't care. He walked up the path to the house. Max greeted him with a nudge to the hand. Marcus sat on the steps and watched Yara. She was already kneeling in the dirt, using her trowel to prepare the ground for her father's seeds. She was planting the future. 6 months later. The shack wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a fortress of life. The roof was patched properly. A new room had been added to the back, a drying shed for herbs and fish. The garden was lush, green, and organized, bursting with vegetables and medicinal plants that Marcus didn't know the names of, but drank every day to steady his nerves. Marcus sat on the porch, cleaning his rifle. His hand was steady as a rock. Yara came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked healthy, strong. The haunted look in her eyes was gone, replaced by the calm authority of a woman who runs her world. "Dinner is ready," she said. "Spicy fish." "Again?" Marcus teased, though he was already standing up. "Until you learn to catch something else," she shot back with a smirk. Max barked from the edge of the clearing. A canoe was approaching, a local fisherman coming to trade fruit for some of Marcus's purified water. The locals didn't call it the haunted place anymore. They called it the post. They knew that if they were in trouble, if someone was sick or lost, they could come to the gringo and the cabocla. They whispered that the man was a warrior spirit, and the woman was a forest witch, and that the giant dog was their guardian. Marcus watched the canoe approach. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't just a sentinel guarding an empty perimeter. He was part of something. He looked at Yara, who was waving to the fisherman. He had bought her freedom with 1,197, but looking at the life they had built from the ashes, he knew the transaction had been the other way around. She hadn't cost him anything. She had saved him. Freedom isn't just about unlocking chains. It's about choosing where you stand. Marcus and Yara found their ground, but the jungle is vast, and peace is fragile. The river brings new stories, new threats, and new mysteries every day. What will grow from the seeds Yara planted? And who else is watching the post from the shadows? If you want to see this partnership face the dangers of the Amazon, subscribe to the channel, join the pack, and tell us in the comments, what is the price of your freedom? The watch continues. We'll see you on the next patrol.